Hello and welcome to the NewsOK Varsity Podcast. I'm Scott Wright, joined by Jacob Unruh, Trent Shadid. Appreciate you joining us today. It is playoff week, fellas. Looking around the room, we all got playoff beards going. That's good. That's a positive thing.
I actually shaved mine and had to grow it back. It's been pretty rough.
But the high school football playoffs are here. Big excitement. First year of the new 6A. We've got a lot of intriguing storylines there. A lot of fun stuff going on throughout the class. Let's talk about a couple of the classes that are a little more up in the air, I guess, is what you'd say. Let's start with Class 3A. I think has probably had more turnover in the top 10 than just about any class throughout the course of the year. Had an unbeaten fall in the last week of the regular season to an unranked team with Berry Hill going down against Lincoln Christian. It's been just a crazy year in that class overall. Locust Grove number 1, the only unbeaten team. Though also you might argue they haven't really been tested at this point. Heritage Hall was the team that both of you guys picked to come out on top of this class. And Jacob, let's start with you. What is it you like about the Chargers, and what else about 3A you think could be an interesting storyline?
I went with Heritage Hall for a few reasons. First of all, I like their matchups to begin with. They open with Blanchard, and I think they would likely get Purcell, a team they just took apart last week actually, and they played their starters most of the way through, and so I think that was kind of a statement to open the playoffs. And then their biggest challenge might be on the top of the bracket there is when they get to if they get to the semifinals, they might have to face the Locust Grove team that we've just talked about, and I think that'll be their biggest challenge, the roadblock. And I think the other reason I went with Heritage Hall is they're healthy this year. I've written about the Hawk tackling, the health part of their season this year, and they're still healthy, and they're a very talented team with Terrell Love and Connor McGinnis and guys like that. And so I really think that stood out to me when I was making that pick the other day over Locust Grove, who hasn't played that tough of a schedule. And I think you got to wonder how much their defense is going to hold up or how much they can score against some better opponents.
I'll be honest, I went with Heritage Hall because I wanted to go with Kingfisher still. But I couldn't. They just beat them a couple weeks ago. So I had to go with Heritage Hall. Kingfisher's kind of the team. It's like we've been waiting for them to really be the dominant team we expect them to be in the preseason, and they will. It seems like through certain stretches of the season, but then they'll have lapses. The loss to Hennessy, then the loss at Heritage Hall, and Heritage Hall's a good team, but I don't know. I just keep expecting more from Kingfisher, and they do have kind of a championship mentality up there, so you really can't count them out. But yeah, that was the team I wanted to pick, and I just couldn't make myself do it with Heritage Hall, having beat them a couple weeks ago. So that's who I went with.
And this time of year, especially with the cold weather that's coming in this week, run the ball, stop the run is the recipe for success this time of year, and that's what Kingfisher can do well. So you've definitely got to keep an eye on them.
I took a risk picking Heritage Hall too. I've done really poorly on picking their games this year.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they hated to see you.
Yeah, I'm sure Andy Boger right now is cussing me, and actually I'm surprised he hasn't texted me, to be honest. He's usually texts me and something. And I also had a kid, one of the players tweeted at me that when I picked Kingfisher to beat him, that I shouldn't pick against the Hawk tackle. That was before the game, and then they won, and he said, "I told you not to pick against the Hawk tackle." So I'm picking the Hawk tackle. Let's go with that. All right.
And it's kind of like Heritage Hall. It was kind of the one team to me that didn't have maybe an obvious fundamental flaw. I mean, Kingfisher stopped the run and run the ball, but their passing game, I saw them play at Seminole, which was poor weather, but it's just not there. And with Locust Grove, we really don't know what they have because their schedule, like you mentioned, has been poor. So that's kind of the one team that didn't have a flaw that really stands out to me.
Right, and a team like Locust Grove that does throw the ball around a ton. If you get a really cold night where the ball is hard, or you get a rainy, icy night, it makes it tough to throw the ball around. Who knows what can happen? But I still picked Locust Grove. I think that the momentum that they've built, the experience they've got with Mason Fine at quarterback, he's most likely going to break the single season passing record this week. And could possibly be playing 4 more games after that. So he's going to put that number really far out there. Nobody's ever thrown for 4,000 yards, and he's about 364, I think, away from that number. So definitely a I think that they're as hot as anybody, obviously, and so I stuck with them, and we'll see how this goes. But it's going to be interesting. 3A is definitely wide open. Another class that falls into that category is Class 5A. I said the Class 3As had the most turnover in the top 10. Class 5A's probably had the most number one teams this year. Lawton Mac it's come back around to them. They're getting their second chance to be number one this week. Now after Guthrie goes down to Deer Creek, you could make a case for Deer Creek as the number one team. They haven't lost to a 5A team this year, even though they're 7-3. So. As we look around 5A, and Trent, we'll start with you on this one. What stands out to you, and how do you see this thing playing out?
Well, it's like you mentioned the parity. I mean, it's incredible. We expected it in the two with the 6A split. We've seen some parity there, but we expected that. 5A has always been what it is. It's a lot of the same teams, but nobody has really established themselves. There's been a ton of close games within a couple of different tough districts. But I went with McAllister because I think they have the single toughest player to stop. I mean, I don't – he makes plays. He can throw the ball. He can run the ball. He can make plays in special teams for him. And like you mentioned, it's the playoffs. You need to be able to not just throw it, not just play defense or whatever. You need to be able to do a bunch of different things depending on the weather and who you're playing it. And so that's why I went with them.
And the thing that I like about Dalton Wood, he's stayed healthy this entire season. He has, he's really built some momentum. Last year he missed a big chunk of the second half of the regular season, and then came back late and tried to get the team going again, and they did, and they got to the finals. But then they come up against a really tough Guthrie team in the title game. But I feel like he's really built on this season from start to finish. They had the midseason loss to Skytook, which has been a big surprise. And a team that certainly looks like they're ready to compete for a title as well. So it's a really interesting dynamic that's going on with McAllister, and wouldn't surprise me at all to see them holding the gold ball at the end of the year. Jacob, what do you like in this one?
Well, I went with Lawton MacArthur. They're the team that they came back to round number one, but I think they have the most talent in 5A overall. And their defense is finally at the level I think that they can finally maybe get past that hump, because they can get to title games. They've done it before. They've gotten the semifinals, but they can never get over that final hump. And everything I've heard from people is 5A coaches, opposing coaches, I'm not going to name any, but opposing coaches, multiple ones, have said how much they don't want to face MacArthur in the playoffs. They don't want to have any part of that team, how that's the most talented team they've seen in 5A. And they're scary good, and I think Will Collins at quarterback, who just committed to Louisiana Monroe recently, is the kind of player that they haven't had necessarily throwing the ball during these playoff runs and running the ball, because he can do a little bit of both, but he can really throw it. And I think that's going to be their key, is how well he plays. And they really get tested right off the bat, too, this week with Carl Albert. I mean, it's not the same Carl Albert, but Carl Albert's a team that can go down there and get some things figured out and really hurt a team like MacArthur.
I think maybe the most interesting team that we almost have to mention is Deer Creek.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who has given us now our new number one again by beating Guthrie in Week 10. But they started 0-3 against 3 6A schools. And then they've beaten McGinnis by 1, Carl Albert by 1, Guthrie by 5 to win maybe the most competitive district in the state.
Yeah.
So maybe they're just that team that finds a way to win, that figures it out, and puts it together here at the end of the year. Who knows?
Every time I count them out, they surprise me. I picked them to beat McGinnis. They had to go triple overtime to do it. I didn't think they'd beat Carl Albert because I didn't think they had the guys up front. They beat Carl Albert. Same thing with Guthrie. I thought up front they're going to be overmatched. They're going to struggle to stop the run with Ide Alexander. And they did at times with Ide, but they actually played really well defensively, and that really stood out to me, is how well they were able to get to the ball and make some plays. They still tackled poorly at times. It was kind of concerning, their tackling ability, but I think there's enough there that they can make a pretty good run.
And another dark horse that you've got to look at in the middle of all of this is Altus, a team that played Lawton Mac to a 2-point game, turns around and beats Ardmore when they had just beaten Lawton Mac. So I mean, Altus only lost a 2-point game to Lawton Mac, and a blowout to Anadarko, which a lot of teams have gotten blown out by Anadarko, regardless of what class you're in. So, they're at Guthrie to start the playoffs off. That's a sign when you talk about games like Lawton Mac Carl Albert in the first round, Guthrie and Altus in the first round. It's a sign of what kind of a playoffs this is going to be in 5A and how wide open it could be, because these are some teams that we're talking about as legit title contenders that could be going down in the first round. Let's move on to Class 6A Division II. The one really interesting game that stands out in the first round of this is Sand Springs at Midwest City. Sand Springs has been better, I think, than a lot of people thought. They played Tulsa, Washington really close. They played Bixby really close. End up in the third seed in that bracket, and get to go on the road to Midwest City. All across the board, there's some intriguing games. But I think that one is the one that has the most potential for an upset. Jacob, you picked Lawton to come through in this bracket. Talk about the Wolverines and what you like there.
I really like their physicality. You were describing last week, I had that Midwest City game, how physical it was and how well they played. I really like how physical they are. Daryl Patterson is one of the fastest kids in the state to touch the football, and he's a difference maker. And I think they have that experience now. I think they can learn from last year's mistake where they had a chance last year to win it before the split, and they messed around in one game and got upset by Westmore. And I think they've learned from it. They seem just like a different team when you're around them now. You see the way they work and the talent they have. Jalen Barnett up front, the best lineman in the state, arguably, and it's just a team that I feel like can set up just right to do what they need to do.
Now, Trent, you went with number 1 Bixby in this one. They've been impressive. They held off Sand Springs in week 10. They beat Booker T to overtake that number 1 spot. Talk about what you see playing out in the 6A2 bracket.
It's kind of interesting because we see, in the past, Midwest City, Lawton, Booker T, they've been able to still kind of hang or at least be in the playoff consideration in the regular 6A. But now you see Bixby, Sand Springs, Bartlesville, teams that aren't getting beat up every week now have a chance, and they're staying more healthy, and they've got a little bit more depth and those sort of things. But it's been most interesting to me with Bixby. Coach Montgomery does a great job. They really know what they're doing. They got great facilities. They got a good passion for the program the couple of times I've been up there. And their offense, they're averaging 42 points a game. And they beat Tulsa, Washington, put 27 on them and beat them by 17. They beat Sand Springs. So, I just think that as far as they've played since the week 1 blowout to Jinx, that's the only team they've lost to. They've really just put together a good streak of 9 games there, and I think they're probably the hottest team right now.
And the thing that impressed me about the Booker T win was that they played the defense that well and held them to 10 points. That was what impressed me, because I didn't know if that side of that team existed at that level, and so that was pretty impressive. And if they can keep playing defense like that, I think that they're right there. The defenses in this class in general have really been pretty good, and that's what's going to be fun to watch this next 3 weeks. Moving on to, I guess I should mention that I picked Lawton in that as well before we bail out on this. But I like Daryl Patterson and the Wolverines' toughness too. So we'll see how that goes. But moving on to 6A1, the big question here in Oklahoma City, at least, is anybody around here going to care in the second round of the playoffs? We've got 4 city teams going up against 4 Tulsa teams. Is anybody going to win?
Mustang, if anybody. You're going to be up there. Right. We're going to cover it, so it's at least a little bit intriguing to us. Mustang at Broken Arrow, but other than that, I don't see it.
My short answer is next week's going to be all East teams. Yeah. The logical part of me doesn't want to pick anyone to beat those guys. I think some can. I think Mustang has the best chance. Owasso could slip up, and Westmore could finally play like Westmore we thought they would be at the beginning of the season, and Memorial could run into some really good luck and not turn the ball over, and maybe things get interesting with Union, depending on if Farquhar's playing too, how the backup quarterback plays. So, but I can't logically pick an East Side school to lose in this situation.
Yeah, Southmore is I think improving at a faster rate than anybody on this side of the state. And the unfortunate thing for them is that they end up going against Jinx, which I think is also improving at a pretty scary
Yeah.
rate for the rest of the state. I picked Tulsa Union to win this thing, but I really think that Jinx is the team that's on the rise right now. Union had to play the last game and a quarter without their starting quarterback, Mason Farquhar. He's supposed to be back from a concussion that he suffered at Mustang, so we'll see what happens with that. It's so intriguing. Westmore is the one that I think if they can get back on track the way that they were the first 5 games of the season, I think that Owasso has kind of plateaued a little bit, and I think they could go up there and win that game. Trent, what do you see from Westmore in that one?
It's hard for me to have confidence in them because I think that the defense is just sort of lost. Early in the season, they had, I guess, some swagger to them. Coach Gaylor provides a lot of that. He's a defensive background guy, but they've just been giving up a ton of points the second half of the season. And Owasso's offense isn't strong, and when you can play a little bit of defense, like Southmore loses 13-9 in a close game, you can give Owasso some problems if you can play defense. And I just don't know that Westmore is there on that side of the ball at this point. But, it's like it's Owasso and Broken Arrow that we're looking at as teams that maybe could get beat.
Right.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Jinx and Union, it's the playoffs. It would be shocking, beyond shocking to see either of them slip up. So.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing to bounce back to Southmore really quick. They're basically one touchdown away from being at Broken Arrow this week, which would be and I think we'd probably be talking about them as the one winnable game instead of Mustang there. But I was at that Southmore Mustang game when it was a 7-3 ball game. Mustang scored early, and Southmore just fought all day trying to get back in that ball game and couldn't pull it off, and just couldn't make the plays in the red zone that they needed. But if they go score there and win that game 10-7, then positions are flipped, and they're the one that's sitting in that better seed and in a winnable game. So, going to be really interesting. Let's wrap this up. One game, everybody, pick one game that is the most intriguing game in the first week of the playoffs. We'll start with Jacob.
I'm gonna go with Del City at Deer Creek. It's where I'm gonna be Friday, and this is intriguing because I think Deer Creek is clearly the better team here. They won the tougher district. Here they are. But I think the thing that stands out about them is they're athletic, but so is Del City. Terry Wilson is going to be a handful for Deer Creek, especially if he gets hot. He's had games where he's thrown 5 touchdowns this year. He's had games where he's thrown 5 interceptions. If he shows up and plays to his ability, Deer Creek's going to have their hands full, and it could be a tough, close game. But if not, I think Clayton Sims and his receivers pick Del City apart.
Trent?
Class 4A, we haven't talked about it yet, but we all picked Anadarko, and through the whole season, that's kind of been a foregone conclusion, really. But Anadarko's had some injuries here in the last couple of weeks. Tough, kind of grinded out games against Newcastle and Weatherford. They ended up winning handily, but it cost them with some injuries to some key players. So I think it's a little bit more open, maybe than it would have been. So I'm going to look at Clinton at Hera as the game to me, because Clinton there's just that championship mentality there. It's the playoffs. Then they seem to kind of be figuring out. They're 5-5, and for most of the season, I didn't even think they're going to make the playoffs. But now they've figured it out. They got Marquez Simpkins at running back, who's a tremendous player, and it's a tough draw for Hera. They end up winning the district. They beat Ada and win the district, but now you've got a Clinton team that kind of seems to have figured it out coming into your place. And I said a few weeks ago on the podcast that Clinton was struggling, and I said I wouldn't be surprised if they reeled off, 8 wins in a row, and you know what I mean. They've done that before, so to me that's the most interesting. Yeah,
I'm going with a Class 3A ball game. John Marshall at Kingfisher, really really intriguing from a lot of levels. For one, I just saw John Marshall over the weekend. With 3:46 left in that game, they were one touchdown away from being district champs. They were up 27-24, but needed it was 24-21. Sorry, they were up 24-21 and needed to win by 10 to claim the district championship in a 3-way tiebreaker. and Bethany was able to milk out the clock, get a touchdown to win the game and win the district. So, this team is really close. They're not your typical 3 seed in the playoffs. Now, Kingfisher isn't your typical 2 seed either. So, it's a really intriguing game. And the funny thing that makes it really interesting is that the winner most likely gets Seminole in the second round, which is a brutal second round matchup. Kingfisher and Seminole have played in the semifinals the last 2 years, so that'd be an interesting second round game. Seminole's got to get past Sulphur. Quick story. I'm the old guy in the room, so I gotta bring out story time. Very first game I officially covered as a sports writer. Seminole at Sulphur back in 2002. Heck of a ball game. It was a really big rivalry back then. It's not so much now, but you had Jim Dixon on one side, Mike Snyder on the other. 2 guys that combined had coached like 80 years of football. And me and Andrew Gilman, former Oklahoman writer, squeezed into this tiny little press box, and I basically learned how to keep stats for football by looking over his shoulder while he wasn't paying attention. So, but anyway, whoever comes out of that Kingfisher John Marshall game has a tough one in the second round, no matter what. So, I'm fired up for the playoffs, one way or another. However way this goes, it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, a West Side team can go pull off an upset up in the Tulsa area in 6A, and the rest of it, we'll see what happens. But thanks for joining us for our playoff preview of the NewsOK Varsity podcast, and we'll talk to you after round 1.